These guys just found out. That's right. Our national debt just topped $22 trillion for the first time ever. And instead of both political parties screaming about cutting spending, they're actually increasing it. Here now to debate Payne Capital Management President Ryan Payne and National Taxpayer Union Senior Fellow Mattie Duppler. Mattie, there was a time when this was sort of news. I mean, are we just so numb to it now we don't care?
Well, I would argue that both politicians and Americans have become somewhat inured to the notion of the growing national debt. Sometimes you can't blame them, right? Couple trillion here, couple trillion there. All of a sudden you're talking about real numbers. But I think that clip you played was right on. We are careening towards a cliff, and we don't know how to stop ourselves. Now, in some ways, it's alarming but not shocking that politicians have not started to use the national debt as an issue that they actually want to try and tackle. But frankly, if you look into the future, $22 trillion now, but $1 trillion every year after that really starts to make a dent. And the reason that politicians should care about this is for both political reasons and realistic ones as well. One is that it destabilizes the future for all Americans. So if you're potentially a Republican or a conservative who talks a lot about economic opportunity, those opportunities narrow as the debt continues to squeeze out other kinds of investment. But if you're a Democrat and you think the federal government should be spending on a lot of different programs, those priorities will also be undermined by the fact that the debt will take up a greater part of the federal budget.
Well, in the Green New Deal, I mean, this $22 trillion probably be a drop in a bucket, Ryan. But, you know, to Mattie's point, there will be a time very soon when we're spending $1 trillion a year on the interest. And when Americans think about what that money could be used for other than that, then I think people start to get upset.
Yeah, that's a good point, Charles. I think the big thing is we've been really lucky because, let's face it, interest rates have been extremely low. So our debt service hasn't been astronomical. But the reality of it is, you know, inflation's starting to go up, not astronomically here. Interest rates have already started to go up since the midsummer of 2016. So at some point here, as interest rates rise, debt service goes up, and then it becomes a real big problem for the economy, almost an anchor.
But it's not a problem yet, though, is it? We had a CPI number out today. It actually keeps going down. There's no signs of real classic inflation. And many people wonder in this Amazon era, Ryan, if we'd ever get this sort of 1970s, early 80s inflation, if that's even possible. And if not, maybe that emboldens politicians to keep spending more.
I mean, sadly, yes, it probably does. Politicians keep spending more, but I think we have to think about it at some point that's going to slow the growth of the economy. And when you have global economies around the world that are starting to grow faster than the U.S., money's going to start to leave the U.S., which hence is going to raise interest rates.
Mattie, you know, you always present it in a very logical way, but you're not running for election or re-election. How do we get folks who want to stay in Washington, D.C. forever, right? They want to bring the bridge to nowhere back home to get reelected. How do we get them to understand the urgency of the problem?
Yeah, Charles, inarguably, the bias towards spending is a hard one to correct for the institutions here in Washington, D.C. But listen, you look at the Congressional Budget Office, you look at the other bean counters here in town, it is clear what the problem is. They tell us over the next 10 years that revenues are going to stabilize around their historical averages, but spending is going to continue to spiral out of control. So it's going to take some bravery from politicians on both sides of the aisle to start tackling some of these problems. You know, the point made earlier by Ryan, the fact that we've got a debt that's going to get more expensive for the federal government probably isn't going to be an issue until we start to see consequences for private industry. And I'm talking about the debt limit that's coming due on March 1st. We'll see in the summer when that debate continues to pick up. But politicians need to start feeling the pain that private enterprises feel when they're making these decisions about how they're going to service their own debt.
Mattie, Ryan, thank you both very much.
Thanks, Charles.